Number 10. Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones, aka GHUL, but only for a very brief moment, is low on here because when she got pregnant she was still a private eye and keeping pretty distant from the superhero community. Jessica Jones debuted in Alias No. 1, the first comic for Marvel's then at the time new Marvel Max imprint. She had been a superheroine whose career was cut short after a disastrous encounter with the Purple Man, who after growing tired of her, sent her off to attack the Avengers, with emphasis on Daredevil. The Avengers proceeded to beat her into a coma, just assuming she'd gone full villain, and when she came out of it, she retired from superhero life. Alias is as much about Jessica's recovery as the mystery she is solving in it. She enters a relationship with Scott Lang, but ends up cheating on him with her close friend Luke Cage, and getting pregnant. Once Scott found out, he was upset, and he left her. But Jessica was in a good place. She had faced the Purple Man head-on, escaped his control, and not killed him. That was a big deal for her in the comics. It made her feel like she was still a hero and still held justice above vengeance. Also, she was gonna get with Luke Cage, hooray! But yeah, pregnant, and later Squirrel Girl would be her and Luke's nanny. Good times. Number 9. Batgirl. We're talking about Barbara Gordon and the DCAU comic verse, so the DC Animated Universe Extended Comic Universe. Here we have to look at the Batman Beyond continuity, wherein the reader finally gets a glimpse into the falling out between Barbara, Dick, and Bruce. While Dick was away, Bruce and Barbara had, well, a fling. It's implied a bit more than that, but it resulted in her getting pregnant, and in a time frame that there is no way she could pass it off as Dick's. Ultimately, she would actually lose the baby after a particularly tough street fight. It would cause her to miscarry. It's a very grim and gritty plot that not everyone took to. It's very hard to be sympathetic to Bruce in it after it. Like, oof, this is worse than the rooftop in the animated Killing Joke adaptation, and that's saying a lot. Number 8. Selina Kyle. Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman, often skirts the line of antihero and thief, but her reforming is a common plot point, and her pregnancy pre-New 52 was part of her path towards trying to be a hero. This was an interesting nod to the past Huntress continuity, where the Huntress had been Bruce and Selina's daughter. The nod is that the baby here is named Helena Kyle, but she's not Batman's daughter, she's Sam Bradley's, but he dies the day Selina finds out that she's pregnant, so Bruce ends up being pretty supportive of this whole affair, but he ultimately helps Selina place Helena up for adoption when she feels that she can't keep her safe because of her life as Catwoman. She would then ask Zatanna to wipe her mind, but Zatanna would say no, which I find hilarious because I mean, Identity Crisis, she was super cool to wipe minds, her friends, but not this time. This is the line.
Number 7. Emma Frost. This alternate reality introduces us to Ruby Summers, the daughter of Emma Frost and Cyclops. Her first appearance was in X Factor special Layla Miller issue 1. So meet Ruby Summers. She lives in that same cruel future where Bishop was born. Now this Sentinel-controlled nightmare of a reality is not an ideal place to live, so there and her much older father ran the Summer Rebellion, where humans and mutants came together to make a stand. Now Emma's never seen in the comic because, well, she wasn't alive when the story began, but Emma was still being talked about and missed dearly by Cyclops. He's just sitting on a bench looking out at the water, all sad and Cyclops-like.
Number 6. Power Girl. So this was a plot that has slipped under the radar for some, also coming to us from the 90s, but not as well handled or poignant as spoilers. Here we have Power Girl, who would be shown hooking up with Parallax, White, Reed Richards hair streaks Hal Jordan, and 2 issues later suddenly be in full-blown pregnancy symptoms, you know, the ones that happen in media. Dizzy, nauseous, food smells. And then all of a sudden she would blurt out mid-flight in a panel that definitely would have been memed if it had come out today, "I think I'm pregnant." You know, there's a reason people don't go around yelling this. There are many causes for nausea and dizziness, and you wouldn't yell those out. "I think I have the flu." So is Hal the father? No. This is one of those immaculate conceptions, and oh man, this plot goes places. Like then she's all, "I'm not pregnant," but that version of her was a robot, and the real version was pregnant. Then Hal was convinced she was lying to him about not being the dad, and so she punched him in the face, and he was all, "Let me be a dad," and she was all, "No, this is a virginal conception." Also, then her baby had powers from within the womb, so she could still kind of keep fighting. She ended up being sidelined during 0 Hour, but okay, who was the dad? It was Arion, and he impregnated her without her consent, so she would give birth to a perfect being. In what way is that better than it being Hal's? The baby would become Equinox, and where is he now? MIA.
Number 5. Cheshire. Made her first comic book debut in New Titans Annual issue 2. She's an assassin and a mercenary who uses potions. She's often gone head to head with the Titans, and sometimes she gets a little closer than what we would imagine. Turns out she fell in love with one of those Titans. She fell in love with Roy Harper, aka Arsenal. See, originally Roy went undercover for the government in a mission to try and turn her over, but they fell in love during this mission. Classic. So he knew there was no way he could turn her in, so he just left. He just called it off. So Jade didn't know his true identity until years later, but after their romance took off, their daughter Leon was welcomed to the world with Roy raising her. See, sometimes it ends up okay, sometimes it's weird, sometimes it's okay. This next one though is pretty weird.
Number 4, QUASAR. Yes, QUASAR got pregnant, and he had a dramatic cover which said, "Mama never said there'd be days like this," which is a reference to a song which is from 1961. So it would already have been a bit out of date and left field as a reference when this came out, which was 1991. So QUASAR was impregnated by her, or Aisha, if we have to name her. She wanted to have perfect babies with him, or just someone. Really, she wanted to have babies with him, the him being Adam Warlock, but he was not down. So she was like, fine, I'll just inject heroes with my reproductive pods to see who's worthy. Not okay, people. Not okay. People and entities and forces need to stop doing this. It's not a good look. Of all the heroes she would forcefully inseminate, QUASAR is the only one who doesn't try to forcibly remove it, and it's kind of just like, okay, and keeps on fighting for her and everything. This was largely played for comedy, which I don't know, is that better or worse than just not knowing why it's squicky? Having your body violated against your consent. Hilarious. But he got the same homage Demi Moore cover as the She-Hulk did, so worth it?
Number 3, Rogue. We now take a look into 2005's X-Men The End. And in issue 5, Rogue, aka Anna Marie, got married and had children with Gambit. And they're a fan favorite when it comes to couples in the X-Men universe. And readers were delighted when they met Rebecca and Oliver LeBeau. Rebecca, nicknamed Ray, is the youngest, and she's a thief just like her dad, and she even carries a staff as well. But she also has the ability to fly, and super strength allows her to pack quite the punch. Oliver, he's great, the kid's awesome. He's older, he has quite the temper, and he loves to fight, and he just happens to be a skilled martial artist and often trains with his father. He has his mother's ability of absorbing powers, only his is of course even stronger. So he's permanently absorbed telepathy, and he's actually not a fan of it. He kind of hates it, which, fair. If I had telepathy, I probably wouldn't like it as much as I thought.
Number 2, Ms. Marvel. Yes, this is number 2, shock and awe. So this storyline is infamous at this point. Miss Marvel would find herself impregnated against her will by her lover, who had altered her mind to make her want him, so rape, so that he could give birth to himself. This occurred in Avengers 200. Now, some have come out after all of the hail of criticisms against this comic being like, it's not that bad. But here's the thing, no one in the story reacts normally here. Her teammates are congratulating her, like, what? No, she has no idea how this happened or why, and she's terrified, and they're like, yeah! Also, it's a scary hyper pregnancy, and then the baby hyper ages and becomes her lover, and then she goes off with him and they accept it. And yet, no one questions her about it. This is probably just writer oversight. Like, no one thought about the implications because perhaps they were outside of their viewpoints or own experiences, which doesn't have to be an issue, but can be if the writer doesn't even think to acknowledge it. So later, she would come back and yell at the team after fan backlash. Some are like, see, it's fine. But this was a retcon only after people complained. Her being mind controlled to give birth to the man who raped her. Totally fine. Number 1, the Invisible Woman. Yes, she's over Miss Marvel. Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman, would be the first woman to become a mom and superhero in comics, so an iconic pregnancy. She would take a break and then come back, like life. Her second pregnancy would be very dramatic, however. In fact, the first time it would not come to fruition and the baby would die because of Sue's exposure to radiation in the negative zone. It was a really sad plotline, in fact, for some fans, too sad, and it would be retconned very convolutedly, so get excited. This pregnancy would be saved by Franklin Richards and his terrifying godlike powers. He would place the baby in an alternate future timeline, where after encountering a Marvel girl from another timeline where she is the daughter of Sue and Doom, she would be reverted to a baby and replaced in the womb of Sue, but allegedly be the original stillborn baby, who Dr. Doom would then help Sue give birth to and name Valeria, the same name that Marvel Girl had in that alternate timeline. The point is, she would have the baby. Hooray! Sue does it all, but with the realism that at times that means making sacrifices and finding a balance. And that's why she takes the number 1 spot.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have TALIA al Ghul. She's the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, the leader of the League of Assassins, and she's constantly being torn between her father and the Caped Crusader himself. Now, in Batman's Son of the Demon, the name should tip you off as to what happens. But by the end of the story, Talia ended up giving birth to a child, and Batman was the father. Meet Damian Wayne. He was perfect. Genetically speaking, of course. He was born from an artificial womb, and he was supposed to join the League of Assassins and be a great warrior. that was the plan. You know, having a powerful skill set in martial arts before he was even a teenager, Talia al Ghul explained who he was and left him with his father, Batman. Now, she was hoping that this would cause problems for Bruce Wayne and that this would disrupt Batman's work. You know, getting the little one to spy on Batman and stir up some drama with Tim Drake in the meantime. He was actually quite eager to replace Tim Drake as Batman's wingman. So troubled Damian Wayne grabs another Robin costume, added some of that League of Assassins gear he was used to, and then he took out the villain Spook. In a rather dark way, too. The guy's wild. At one point, he ended up sucker punching Tim Drake off of a T-Rex model. Sometimes those villain genes just get carried down no matter how the kid gets born. And before we continue on with this list of bad moms, guys, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you want. You should, because it really helps out our studio quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for your continuous support. Now let's get back to this video. Number 9, Superwoman, Earth 3. She made her comic book debut not too long ago in Justice League Volume 2, Issue 23. Lois Lane of Earth 3, that is an Amazon native and a member of the crime syndicate. Now, she was in a relationship with her teammate Ultraman, but that relationship was pretty toxic. So she veered off and had an affair with another teammate, Owlman. And then she also had another affair, but this time with Alexander Luthor. So she had this handy little tool that helped her get all these side romances in the works. She had the lasso of submission, which enslaves others to her will. So it was only a matter of time before she got pregnant with one of these guys. Now, supposedly, the child was Ultraman's. But, she told Owlman that it was his. She was manipulating both men. Her plan was much deeper though. When the Injustice League had attacked, they freed the prisoner Mazaz, who Superman then revealed was the true father all along. So yeah, she manipulated the Syndicate into bringing him back as a prisoner, where she helped him go against Black Adam and Bizarro. And honestly, this whole love triangle, or love hexagon, is definitely Bizarro. That's the word I would use for it. Number 8, Catwoman. Selina Kyle first appeared in comics way back in 1940 in Batman issue 1. She's had a pretty on and off complicated relationship with Batman, so it was just a matter of time before the two got really close. In Huntress issue 1, the Huntress of course is introduced as Helena Bartolini, but there was another Huntress in the comics as well, and she was the daughter of Bruce and Selina. She was introduced to readers in Huntress volume 3, issue 1. Now this all happened on Earth 2 as well. See, Helena is a lawyer for Cranston, Grayson, and Wayne, but the daughter of Batman and Catwoman. So she's got a few tricks up her sleeve as well. When she was only 19 years old, her mother, who used to be Catwoman, passed away in a tragic mishap, no thanks to this henchman named Silky Cernak. He was the reason behind a photo that came up, and it showed Selina Kyle as Catwoman attacking a police officer. So of course Helena was pretty upset, and she wanted to get even. They're making her mom look bad. So she took a page out of her parents' book and became the Huntress. Now she went after Silky Smooth Cernak and then got him arrested, and her mother wasn't even as bad as she thought, because the photo, it was tampered with. It wasn't even a legit photo. But she ended up keeping the suit and attitude, and eventually wound up on the Justice Society of America. And also, recently this year, readers got their first look at Jim Lee's variant cover for Batman and Catwoman issue 4, where Helena Wayne stands front and center, and in this version, she looks really, really cool. If you haven't been reading that run, you're missing out.
Number 7, spoiler, Stephanie Brown. Her pregnancy storyline is famous. It occurred in 1998 and was praised for realism and the audacity to tackle such a topic in comics. This happened in Robin's comic series, the Robin in question being Tim Drake. At this point, Spoiler was an accepted vigilante in Gotham, but not on good enough terms with the Bat family to be in the inner circle, despite dating Tim. She would find out that she was pregnant with her ex-boyfriend's baby, and he was no longer in town. Despite not revealing himself, Tim would support her using an alias by taking her to Lamaze classes and the like. Stephanie decided to carry the child to term and give them up for adoption, somewhere hopefully away from Gotham for a better life. Intense stuff, people. The 90s weren't all shoulder guns and pouches.
Number 6, Ursa. She was a Kryptonian military officer who was loyal to General Zod. But of course she was banished to the Phantom Zone with him, and then in there, they conceived a child. That child's name was Lord Zod. They conceived him in the Phantom Zone until he arrived by pod to Earth. So this young boy was lifting TV sets and cars like it was nothing. Everybody was soon looking his direction. It was obvious that he wasn't from around here. So the Department of Metahumans Affairs decided to take the boy to a secret place in Washington to do tests and all that jazz. But they didn't tell Superman, which is not a great idea. He broke Laura Zod out and then convinced Lois to adopt the young boy, naming him Christopher Kent. And yes, he is also immune to kryptonite. Now, of course, he has similar powers to Superman, but the most unique ability Christopher Kent has is that of telekinesis. Number 5, Madeline Pryor. She made her first debut in Uncanny X-Men issue 168. And since her first arrival to comics, she bared a striking resemblance to Jean Grey, who had passed on at this time in the comics. Now, everybody thought she was just Jean Grey reborn, and to make things more fishy, Madeline's mind was closed off to Professor X, and she was the only survivor of a plane crash that went down when the Dark Phoenix just happened to disappear on the moon. Coincidence? Maybe not. No. So what ended up happening was that she was a clone of Jean Grey created by Mr. Sinister. See, Mr. Sinister's plan was for Madeline and Scott Summers to have a child, and then they could use that child to defeat Apocalypse. And that child was, of course, Nathan Summers, aka Cable. Number 4, ORCA. This next one takes place in the Injustice Elseworld series, where Killer Croc and ORCA are actually married. Yeah, it's nice when it starts with the two of them being together already. Like, no one has to go to jail, no one's getting broken out, no one's conceiving children in the Phantom Zone. It's nice, it's fun. It's weird, but it's fine, at least in terms of villains. Now, in Injustice 2, issue 42, ORCA walks in, simply announces that she's pregnant, and then a nice spit take is the first response. And then Killer Croc stands up and he's like, well, I should probably go. And then everyone's like, I have so many questions, but if you ask questions, Killer Croc will not answer them. He'll instead put your head through a wall. So keep those thoughts to yourself, my friend. That child would be quite the unit. I mean, ORCA mixed with Killer Croc, I would never want to bump into this family in any parking lot ever. That sounds like a nightmare. They're cute though, they're happy.
Number 3, Spider-Woman Jessica Drew. Jessica Drew's pregnancy was a huge plot point for her. She would continue to fight crime throughout while pregnant, but she would have a special force field belt for her stomach, so it's fine. Sure, Jan. There would be a whole who's the dad question here as well, and the answer is some guy. She would artificially inseminate herself because she wanted to be a mom. This was a shift for her character, as initially she had seemed to imply that she wasn't interested in motherhood. But people change, things happen. Her whole pregnancy would be all about how, yeah, she could do it all, which, okay, yes, nice, mom power. As someone who has been pregnant, even if your pregnancy is amazing, you still can't do it all. And that's not a bad thing or a weakness, just a reality. There's another person in there. Her taking time off wouldn't have made her less of a hero, and implying that it would have, well, okay. So after having the baby, she would suffer from separation anxiety and wrestle with going back to being Spider-Woman at all. But then she would decide that she would, so she could be a good example.
Number 2, Maxima. Making her first appearance in Action Comics issue 645, Maxima is the oldest child of the royal family of Almerac. She came to Earth in search for a suitable mate, and then when she laid eyes on Superman, she knew he was the one. Just because they were compatible doesn't mean it's gonna happen. So Superman rejected this offer, so she went ahead and teamed up with Brainiac for a bit more before ultimately turning against him and joining the reformed Justice League. Now down the road, she again offered herself up to Superman because, you know, she's a better person now, doing good deeds. But again, Superman said nay. He was married to Lois, so it's just not in the cards. Sorry, Maxima, it's not gonna happen. But in Adventures of Superman Annual 3, we see a front cover that makes readers turn their heads. Well, after an untimely passing, Lois Lane sadly wasn't really in the picture anymore. Clark sadly felt responsible for not saving her, you know, typical hero stuff, typical guilt. So he left Earth, he couldn't bear it. He felt he didn't belong there anymore, truly. And while Superman was being attacked in space, Maxima came to their rescue. And Superman, well, he decided to stick around, not having anywhere else to go. He figured, why not? Now this escalated, they had their ups and downs, but in the comic it implies that the two eventually had kids. So the lesson here, folks, is if you get rejected, just keep trying, because maybe your dream man will just come swooping by you in space out of the blue. You never know. And finally, number 1, Harley Quinn. Of course, we have to mention the time Harley had children. Now, this is from the dceu, where we don't necessarily see her children directly, but we meet Dee Dee, her 2 granddaughters who were twins, and they're just a load of fun. They were referred to as Dee Dee because it's cute and it sounds cool, but their names were actually Delilah and Daydream. So she had raised these twins in hopes of keeping them away from the life of crime, but they inherited the same fascination that Harley once had with the Joker. So this was easier said than done. They both ended up joining his gang when they were just teenagers. Honestly, anything that has to do with twins is just so fun to watch. Even if they're evil, I'm like, yeah, you guys look like you're coordinated, you're wearing the same thing, it's great. Kicking off the list at number 10, we have Kitty Pryde. We'll start off this list with one of the more wild X-Men adventures. It's kind of a pregnancy, but kind of not. Hear me out. We go back now to Wolverine and the X-Men issue 4, where Kitty is surprised. She has a pregnancy scare, only she's 8 months pregnant out of the blue. Well, she thought that she was pregnant when it was actually these brood drones that were attacking her from inside of her body. So the X-Men fought back, of course, but this time they were fighting at a microscopic level. They shrank down really small to get a closer look, and they fought these brood drones inside of her. It was crazy. Now at this time, Kitty was leading the Jean Grey school, and while the team was fighting in her body, Kitty had to fight off an adult brood while they invaded the school. Now thankfully Kitty was injected with Centaurian penicillin after the battle was done, and she didn't have any more pregnancy scares with any drones or anything happening like that. So that was a one and done, thankfully. And before we continue on with this list, guys, if you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up, it really does help our channel out quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thanks so much. Now let's get right back into the list. Number 9, Wanda Maximoff. This pregnancy comes from Earth 2182. Now you may be thinking of a different pregnancy involving the Scarlet Witch, which I'll get into a little later on. But in this universe, she gives birth to a daughter named Nocturne. And the father here is, well, you can probably guess by looking at them, Nightcrawler. She got her dad's looks, unfortunately, and Nocturne came to life in Marvel Comics with X-Men Millennial Visions issue 1. She of course possesses the powers of both her parents, and it's quite the spectacle. She can blast off energy bolts just like her mother, and she can climb walls like her father. But what makes her even more powerful than her parents is that she also has the ability to possess others for 12 hours. Once that timer is done, the victim is just down for the count for the entire day. Talk about the hangover of a lifetime. Number 8, Mystique. This next one's kind of funky. Okay, so this kid was born and almost became president, basically. Yeah, so Mystique and Sabretooth, 2 iconic X-Men characters, had a son named Graydon Creed, which sounds evil right off the bat. But basically at this time, Mystique was posing as a spy, and she seduced Victor while he was in Germany on a mission. So when Mystique gave birth to Graydon Creed, he didn't have superpowers or anything like that. No, instead he was given up for adoption, where Mystique would then keep an eye on him from afar. Now it wasn't until he found out who his true parents were that he learned that he'd been abandoned, until he started to become a villain and despise the mutant community. Rightfully so. I mean, you got a fair point. Growing up to form a group called the Friends of Humanity, which isn't as friendly as it sounds. In fact, it was for opposing mutant civil rights. So quite the opposite. Opposing them, of course, by causing violent attacks. So he ended up running for president in X Factor, because that's what bad people do apparently now. And in issue 130, we see him taken out by a future version of Mystique. Told you, time is tricky in these comics. She takes him out because Graydon was responsible for the death of Trevor Chase, the grandson of Destiny in the future. So yeah, some of these pregnancies are a little bit more stressful than others. Number 7. Lady Shiva. She's been known as a villain and a hero since her first debut in Richard Dragon Kung Fu Fighter issue 5. Now, Lady Shiva and the assassin David Kane did have a child named Cassandra Kane, who was the 4th Batgirl. She also had another child as well in another comic, which I'll explain a little later on in this list. So she made her first debut in Batman issue 567, called The Mark of Cain. When Lady Shiva had her, she was born with the intention to serve as a bodyguard for Ra's al Ghul. Her father, of course, trained her as a child, so she wasn't taught to speak though, that's the thing. He would instead use actions to communicate with young Cassandra. That, and they cut her off from the outside world, only exposing her to the things that she needs only when necessary. So not the most fun childhood, that's for sure. So what ended up happening is that part of the brain that registers speech and language processing was instead being used to read other people's body language, like super well. So this made her a great fighter. She could predict the moves that somebody was gonna do before she did them. Number 6, Wanda Maximoff, again. One of the biggest turning points for Wanda in the MCU is of course during the events of WandaVision. See, just like the comics, Wanda gives birth to 2 twins, Billy and Tommy. And as we saw in the show, the kids were just created using Wanda's magic, and they were also left behind, as well as the life that she had created post-Endgame, including Vision. But what does this mean now for Wanda? Will she be okay? It kind of feels like she just lost Vision again, this time with children in a house. It kind of feels worse than the first time around, maybe. So the loss of her kids is actually what caused the events of the House of M to unfold in the comics. And with Wanda reading up on chaos magic with the Book of the Damned at the end of that show, and we hear her kids calling out to her right before the screen cuts to black, perhaps she's not completely done with them yet. Billy, aka Wiccan, gained the abilities of magic like his mother, and Tommy, aka Speed, has has, well, super speed, like her brother Quicksilver.
Number 5. TIGRA. TIGRA would find herself pregnant during the Initiative storyline when she entered into a relationship with Yellow Jacket Hank Pym. But she would discover she was pregnant after the Skrull invasion, where Hank had been revealed to be a Skrull. So she had to wonder, was it his baby or a Skrull baby? I mean, maybe it would be better if it was a Skrull baby. Hank has a lot of issues. TIGRA initially decided that she was going to abort the baby either way, but her cat-like physiology would allow her to carry the baby to term in 2 months. And so she would give birth to said cat baby. And the Skrull was the real father, by the way. I feel like Maury, this may be my favorite video. I have no idea what that says about me. The baby was named William, and TIGRA was initially very lukewarm about his entire existence. Also, since it's a Skrull baby, genetically it was still Hank's anyway, because that's the level of copying we're talking about here, people. She would warm up to William eventually. I mean, look at the little cat baby. And he would mature faster than your average baby as well.
Number 4. Mystique. Again, when you have a child, at least in the Marvel Universe, those powers are not only passed on, but usually they're stronger than before, because that's just how fun comic books work. This was the case on Earth 13729 when Mystique gave birth to Raze, with the father being Wolverine. Sounds like the dream team. Imagine being born with just one of those parents' abilities, you'd be set. But luckily, Raze was born with both. Well, not really luckily, unfortunately rather. Yeah, Raze grew up resenting his mother, and eventually his hatred came full circle when he took her out and then replaced her without anybody knowing. Yeah, super kids can be super evil as well, you never know. Raze's shape-shifting powers are stronger than his mother's, and he clearly has some aggression issues just like his dad. In X-Men No More Humans, Raze had this ultimate plan where he was going to remove the human population from Earth, and then now instead bring in mutants from other multiverses to make this massive mutant paradise, this big water park full of mutants. Some of these alternate offsprings are just a nightmare. Oh my god. Number 3, Lady Shiva. Again, this time we're talking about Lady Shiva from the Dark Multiverse. See, your partner this time around was none other than back-breaking Bane, and they had a son named Torn, and this happened right after Bane had actually broke the Batman. Now, cut to 30 years down the road, John Paul Valley is the new Batman, and poor young Torn had to watch his father get broken by the Bat this time around. So he trained with his mother in the League of Assassins, and then when he got a little bit older, it was time. They freed Bruce Wayne from capture in Gotham City and helped restore him to the mantle of Batman so they can get revenge on John Paul Valley. And as far as villain mothers go, this isn't too bad. I mean, anything that involves breaking Batman out to get revenge, hey, I'm on board, sign me up. Number 2, Mystique. Again. During the Battle of the Atom story, we were introduced to Charles Xavier II. This happened when Mystique was disguised as Moira McTaggart. He was given up at birth, and when his powers developed, he accidentally took out his new mom. Oops. But when he tracked down Moira, Mystique, that was the time I mentioned earlier, with Raze taking the spot of Mystique. So the two were actually half-brothers. How neat is that? They both ended up joining forces come All New X-Men issue 27. Xavier 2 was so powerful, he actually took over the minds of current X-Men members and recruited them to his own brotherhood. He was the worst. He controlled them like puppets. He gave them just enough brain activity to know what was happening to them, but not enough to fight it. What a damn nightmare. And finally, number 1, Storm. If you think that alternate reality of Earth 13729 is bad, with all those evil little offspring joining forces, wait until I tell you about Storm's child. Meet Chimera, also making her first debut in X-Men issue 36, Battle of the Atom. She's with the good guys this time. That's why I wanted to end with this one, because she's from the same world as Xavier 2, but she's on the good side. Thankfully. Chimera is the daughter of Storm, so she obtains the ability, of course, to manipulate the weather, and she too can make it rain. She can also influence animal behaviors psionically. That plus her super sense of smell allows her to track just about anybody. It's about time we get someone on the good team in this mad world.